The SLV-3 project had been formulated in such a way that the major technology work centers, both at VSSC and at SHAR, could handle propellant production, rocket motor testing and launch of any large diameter rocket. As participants in the SLV-3 project, we set 3 milestones for ourselves: development and flight qualification of all subsystems through sounding rockets by 1975, suborbital flights by 1976, and the final orbital flight in 1978. The work tempo had picked up now and the atmosphere was charged with excitement. Wherever I went, our teams had something interesting to show me. A large number of things were being done for the first time in the country, and the ground-level technicians had had no prior exposure to this kind of work. I saw new performance dimensions growing among my team members. Performance dimensions are factors that lead to creation. They go beyond competencies such as the skills and knowledge of the individual. Performance dimensions are broader and deeper than what a person must know and be able to do in order to function well in his or her job. They include attitudes, values, and character traits. They exist at various levels of the human personality. At the behavioral level, at the outermost ring of the tree, we can observe skills and measure knowledge. Social roles and self-image dimensions are found at the intermediate level. Motives and traits exist at the innermost or core level. If we can identify those performance dimensions which are most highly correlated with job success, we can put them together to form a blueprint for outstanding performance in both thought and action. Although SLV-3 was still in the future, its subsystems were being completed. In June 1974, we used the Centaur sounding rocket launch to test some of our critical systems. A scaled-down heat shield of SLV, rate gyro unit, and vehicle attitude programmer were integrated into the Centaur rocket. The 3 systems involved wide-ranging expertise: composite materials, control engineering, and software, none of them ever having been tried before in the country. The test was a complete success. Until then, the Indian space program had not gone beyond sounding rockets, and even knowledgeable people were not ready to see and acknowledge its efforts as anything more serious than fiddling around with meteorological instruments. For the first time, we inspired the confidence of the nation. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi told Parliament on July 24, 1974, the development and fabrication of relevant technologies, subsystems, and hardware, to make India's first satellite launch vehicle, are progressing satisfactorily. A number of industries are engaged in the fabrication of components. The first orbital flight by India is scheduled to take place in 1978. Like any other act of creation, the creation of the SLV-3 also had its painful moments. One day, when my team and I were totally engrossed in the preparation of the static test of the first stage motor, the news of a death in the family reached me. My brother-in-law and mentor Janab Ahmed Jalaluddin was no more. For a couple of minutes, I was immobilized. I could not think, could not feel anything. When I could focus on my surroundings once more and attempted to participate in the work, I found myself talking incoherently, and then I realized that, with Jalaluddin, a part of me had passed away too. A vision of my childhood reappeared before me: evening walks around the Rameswaram temple, shining sand and dancing tides in the moonlight, stars looking down from an unlit sky on a new moon night, Jalaluddin showing me the horizon sinking into the sea, arranging money for my books, and seeing me off at Santa Cruz Airport. I felt that I had been thrown into a whirlpool of time and space. My father, by now more than 100 years old, pall-bearer for his son-in-law, who had been half his age, the bereft soul of my sister Zohara, her wounds from the loss of her 4-year-old son still raw, these images came before my eyes in a blur, too terrible for me to comprehend. I leaned on the assembly jig, composed myself, and left a few instructions with Drive Srinivasan, Deputy Project Director, to carry on with the work in my absence. Traveling overnight in a combination of district buses, I reached Rameswaram only the next day. During this time, I did my best to free myself from the very past which appeared to have come to an end with Jalaluddin. But the moment I reached my house, grief assailed me afresh. I had no words for Zohara or for my niece Merbub, both of whom were crying uncontrollably. I had no tears to shed. We sorrowfully put Jalaluddin's body to rest. My father held my hands for a long time. There were no tears in his eyes either. Do you not see, Abul, how the Lord lengthens the shadows? Had it been his will, he could have made them constant. But he makes the sun their guide, little by little he shortens them. It is he who has made the night a mantle for you, and sleep a rest. Jalaluddin has gone into a long sleep, a dreamless sleep, a complete rest of all his being within simple unconsciousness. Nothing will befall us except what Allah has ordained. He is our guardian. In Allah, my son, put your trust. He slowly closed his wrinkled eyelids and went into a trance-like state. Death has never frightened me. After all, everyone has to go one day. But perhaps Jalaluddin went a little too early, a little too soon. I could not bring myself to stay for long at home. I felt the whole of my inner self drowning in a sort of anxious agitation, and inner conflicts between my personal and my professional life. For many days, back in Thumba, I felt a sense of futility I had never known before about everything I was doing. I had long talks with Professor Dhawan. He told me that my progress on the SLV project would bring me solace. The confusion would first lessen and would later pass away altogether. He drew my attention to the wonders of technology and its achievements. Gradually, the hardware began emerging from the drawing boards. Sasi Kumar built a very effective network of fabrication work centers. Within days of getting a component drawing, he would embark on the fabrication with what was available. Nambudiri and Pillai were spending their days and nights at the propulsion laboratory developing 4 rocket motors simultaneously. MSR Dev and Sandlas drew up meticulous plans for mechanical and electrical integration of the vehicle. Madhavan Nair and Murthy examined the systems developed by the VSSC Electronics Laboratories and engineered them into flight subsystems wherever it was possible. U.S. Singh brought up the first launch ground system, comprising of telemetry, telecommand, and radar. He also chalked out a detailed work plan with Shah for the flight trials. Dr. Sundararajan closely monitored mission objectives and concurrently updated the systems. Dr. Srinivasan, a competent launch vehicle designer, discharged all my complementary and supplementary functions as the SLV Deputy Project Director. He noticed what I had overlooked, heard the points I failed to listen to, and suggested possibilities that I had not so much as visualized. We learned the hard way that the biggest problem of project management is to achieve a regular and efficient interfacing between the different individuals and work centers. Hard work can be set at naught in the absence of proper coordination. I had the fortune of having Y.S. Rajan from the ISRO headquarters as my friend in those times. Rajan was, and is, a universal friend. His friendship embraced with equal warmth turners, fitters, electricians, and drivers as well as scientists, engineers, contractors and bureaucrats. Today when the press calls me a welder of people, I attribute this to Rajan. His close interaction with different work centers created such a harmony in SLV affairs that the fine threads of individual efforts were woven into a mighty fabric of great strength. In 1976, my father passed away. He had been in poor health for quite some time due to his advanced age. The death of Jalaluddin had also taken a toll on his health and spirit. He had lost his desire to live, as though after seeing Jalaluddin return to his divine source, he too had become eager to return to his. Whenever I learned about my father's indifferent health, I would visit Rameswaram with a good city doctor. Every time I did so, he would chide me for my unnecessary concern and lecture me on the expenses incurred on the doctor. Your visit is enough for me to get well, why bring a doctor and spend money on his fees, he would ask. This time he had gone beyond the capabilities of any doctor, care, or money. My father JAINULABDEEN, who had lived on Rameswaram Island for 102 years, had passed away leaving behind 15 grandchildren and 1 great-grandson. He had led an exemplary life. Sitting alone, on the night after the burial, I remembered a poem written on the death of Yeats by his friend Auden, and felt as if it was written for my father. Earth, receive an honored guest, William Yeats is laid to rest. In the prison of his days teach the free man how to praise. In worldly terms, it was the death of just another old man. No public mourning was organized, no flags were lowered to half-mast, no newspaper carried an obituary for him. He was not a politician, a scholar, or a businessman. He was a plain and transparent man. My father pursued the supreme value, the good. His life inspired the growth of all that was benign and angelic, wise and noble. My father had always reminded me of the legendary Abu Ben Adhem who, waking one night from a deep dream of peace, saw an angel writing in a book of gold the names of those who love the Lord. Abu asked the angel if his own name was on the list. The angel replied in the negative. Disappointed but still cheerful, Abu said, "Write my name down as one that loves his fellow men." The angel wrote, and vanished. The next night, it came again with a great wakening light, and showed the names of those whom the love of God had blessed. And Abu's name was the first on the list. I sat for a long time with my mother, but could not speak. She blessed me in a choked voice when I took leave of her to return to Thumba. She knew that she was not to leave the house of her husband, of which she was the custodian, and I was not to live with her there. Both of us had to live out our own destinies. Was I too stubborn or was I excessively preoccupied with the SLV? Should I not have forgotten for a while my own affairs in order to listen to her? I regretfully realized this only when she passed away soon afterwards. The SLV-3 APJ rocket, developed as a common upper stage with Diamant, scheduled to be flight tested in France, was mired in a series of knotty problems. I had to rush to France to sort them out. Before I could depart, late in the afternoon, I was informed that my mother had passed away. I took the first available bus to Nagarkoil. From there, I traveled to Rameswaram, spending a whole night in the train and performed the last rites the next morning. Both the people who had formed me had left for their heavenly abode. The departed had reached the end of their journey. The rest of us had to continue walking the weary road and life had to go on. I prayed in the mosque my father had once taken me to every evening. I told him that my mother could not have lived longer in the world without the care and love of her husband, and therefore had preferred to join him. I begged his forgiveness. They carried out the task I designed for them with great care, dedication, and honesty and came back to me. Why are you mourning their day of accomplishment? Concentrate on the assignments that lie before you, and proclaim my glory through your deeds. Nobody had said these words, but I heard them loud and clear. An inspiring aphorism in the Quran on the passing away of souls filled my mind: your wealth and children are only a temptation, whereas Allah, with him, is an eternal award. I came out of the mosque with my mind at peace and proceeded to the railway station. I always remember that when the call for namaz sounded, our home would transform into a small mosque. My father and my mother leading, and their children and grandchildren following. The next morning I was back at Thumba, physically exhausted, emotionally shattered, but determined to fulfill our ambition of flying an Indian rocket motor on foreign soil. On my return from France, after successfully testing the SLV-3 APJ motor, Dr. Brahm Prakash informed me one day about the arrival of Wernher von Braun. Everybody working in rocketry knows of von Braun, who made the lethal V-2 missiles that devastated London in the Second World War. In the final stages of the war, von Braun was captured by the Allied forces. As a tribute to his genius, von Braun was given a top position in the rocketry program at NASA. Working for the U.S. Army, von Braun produced the landmark Jupiter missile, which was the first IRBM with a 3,000 km range. When I was asked by Dr. Brahm Prakash to receive von Braun at Madras and escort him to Thumba, I was naturally excited. The V-2 missile, an abbreviation of the German word Vergeltungswaffe, was by far the greatest single achievement in the history of rockets and missiles. It was the culmination of the efforts made by von Braun and his team in the VFR, Society for Space Flight. In the 1920s, what had begun as a civilian effort soon became an official army one, and von Braun became the technical director of the German missile laboratory at Kummersdorf. The first V-2 missile was first tested unsuccessfully in June 1942. It toppled over onto its side and exploded. But on August 16, 1942, it became the first missile to exceed the speed of sound. Under the supervision of von Braun, more than 10,000 V-2 missiles were produced between April and October 1944 at the gigantic underground production unit near Nordhausen in Germany. That I would be traveling with this man, a scientist, a designer, a production engineer, an administrator, a technology manager, all rolled into one. What more could I have asked for? We flew in an Avro aircraft which took around 90 minutes from Madras to Trivandrum. Von Braun asked me about our work and listened, as if he was just another student of rocketry. I never expected the father of modern rocketry to be so humble, receptive, and encouraging. He made me feel comfortable right through the flight. It was hard to imagine that I was talking to a giant of missile systems, as he was so self-effacing. He observed that the length to diameter L/D ratio of the SLV-3, which was designed to be 22, was on the higher side, and cautioned me about the aeroelastic problems which must be avoided during flight. Having spent the major part of his working life in Germany, how did he feel in America? I asked this of von Braun, who had become a cult figure in the States after creating the Saturn rocket in the Apollo mission which put man on the moon. America is a country of great possibilities, but they look upon everything un-American with suspicion and contempt. They suffer from a deep-rooted NIH not invented here complex, and look down on alien technologies. If you want to do anything in rocketry, do it yourself, von Braun advised me. He commented, SLV-3 is a genuine Indian design and you may be having your own troubles. But you should always remember that we don't just build on successes, we also build on failures. On the topic of the inevitable hard work that goes with rocket development and the degree of commitment involved, he smiled and said with a glint of mischief in his eyes, hard work is not enough in rocketry. It is not a sport where mere hard work can fetch you honors. Here, not only do you have to have a goal, but you have to have strategies to achieve it as fast as possible. Total commitment is not just hard work, it is total involvement. Building a rock wall is back-breaking work. There are some people who build rock walls all their lives, and when they die, there are miles of walls, mute testimonials to how hard those people had worked. He continued, but there are other men who, while placing one rock on top of another, have a vision in their minds, a goal. It may be a terrace with roses climbing over the rock walls and chairs set out for lazy summer days. Or the rock wall may enclose an apple orchard or mark a boundary. When they finish, they have more than a wall. It is the goal that makes the difference. Do not make rocketry your profession, your livelihood. Make it your religion, your mission. Did I see something of Professor Vikram Sarabhai in von Braun? It made me happy to think so. With 3 deaths in the family in as many successive years, I needed total commitment to my work in order to keep performing. I wanted to throw all my being into the creation of the SLV. I felt as if I had discovered the path I was meant to follow, God's mission for me and my purpose on His earth. During this period, it was as though I had pushed a hold button. No badminton in the evenings, no more weekends or holidays. No family, no relations, not even any friends outside the SLV circle. To succeed in your mission, you must have single-minded devotion to your goal. Individuals like myself are often called workaholics. I question this term because that implies a pathological condition or an illness. If I do that which I desire more than anything else in the world and which makes me happy, such work can never be an aberration. Words from the 26th Psalm come to mind while I work. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Total commitment is a crucial quality for those who want to reach the very top of their profession. The desire to work at optimum capacity leaves hardly any room for anything else. I have had people with me who would scoff at the 40 hours a week job they were being paid for. I have known others who used to work 60, 80, and even 100 hours a week because they found their work exciting and rewarding. Total commitment is the common denominator among all successful men and women. Are you able to manage the stresses you encounter in your life? The difference between an energetic and a confused person is the difference in the way their minds handle their experiences. Man needs his difficulties because they are necessary to enjoy success. All of us carry some sort of a superintelligence within us. Let it be stimulated to enable us to examine our deepest thoughts, desires, and beliefs. Once you have done this, charged yourself, as it were, with your commitment to your work, you also need good health and boundless energy. Climbing to the top demands strength, whether to the top of Mount Everest or to the top of your career. People are born with different energy reserves, and the one who tires first and burns out easily will do well to reorganize his or her life at the earliest. In 1979, a 6-member team was preparing the flight version of a complex second-stage control system for static test and evaluation. The team was in countdown mode at T15 minutes, 15 minutes before the test. One of the 12 valves did not respond during checkout. Anxiety drove the members of the team to the test site to look into the problem. Suddenly the oxidizer tank, filled with red fuming nitric acid, RFNA, burst, causing severe acid burns to the team members. It was a very traumatic experience to see the suffering of the injured. Kurup and I rushed to the Trivandrum Medical College Hospital and begged to have our colleagues admitted, as 6 beds were not available in the hospital at that point of time. Sivaramkrishnan Nair was one among the 6 persons injured. The acid had burned his body at a number of places. By the time we got a bed in the hospital, he was in severe pain. I kept vigil at his bedside. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Sivaramakrishnan regained consciousness. His first words expressed regret over the mishap and assured me that he would make up the slippage in schedules caused by the accident. His sincerity and optimism, even in the midst of such severe pain, impressed me deeply. Men like Sivaramkrishnan are a breed apart. They are the strivers, always reaching higher than the last time. And with their social and family life welded to their dream, they find the rewards of their drive overwhelming the inherent joy of being in flow. This event greatly enhanced my confidence in my team, a team that would stand like a rock in success and failure. I have used the word flow at many places without really elaborating its meaning. What is this flow? And what are these joys? I could call them moments of magic. I see an analogy between these moments and the high that you experience when you play badminton or go jogging. Flow is a sensation we experience when we act with total involvement. During flow, action follows action according to an internal logic that seems to need no conscious intervention on the part of the worker. There is no hurry, there are no distracting demands on one's attention. The past and the future disappear. So does the distinction between self and the activity. We had all come under the current of the SLV flow. Although we were working very hard, we were very relaxed, energetic and fresh. How did it happen? Who had created this flow? Perhaps it was the meaningful organization of the purposes we sought to achieve. We would identify the broadest possible purpose level and then work towards developing a feasible target solution from a variety of alternatives. It was this working backwards to develop a creative change in the problem solution that used to put us in flow. When the SLV3 hardware started emerging, our ability to concentrate increased markedly. I felt a tremendous surge of confidence, in complete control over myself and over the SLV3 project. Flow is a byproduct of controlled creativity. The first requirement is to work as hard as you can at something that presents a challenge and is approved by your heart. It may not be an overwhelming challenge, but one that stretches you a little, something that makes you realize that you are performing a task better today than you did yesterday, or the last time you tried to do it. Another prerequisite for being in flow is the availability of a significant span of uninterrupted time. In my experience, it is difficult to switch into the flow state in less than half an hour. And it is almost impossible if you are bedeviled by interruptions. Is it possible to switch yourself into flow by using some sort of a conditioning device in much the same way that we condition ourselves to learn effectively? The answer is yes, and the secret is to analyze previous occasions when you have been in flow, because each person has his or her unique natural frequency which responds to a particular stimulus. You alone can identify the common denominator in your case. Once you have isolated this common denominator, you can set the stage for flow. I have experienced this state many times, almost every day of the SLV mission. There have been days in the laboratory when I have looked up to find the laboratory empty and realized that it was way past the quitting time. On other days, my team members and I have been so caught up in our work that the lunch hour slipped by without our even being conscious that we were hungry. Analyzing such occasions in retrospect, I find them similar in the sense that this flow was experienced when the project was nearing completion, or when the project had reached that phase when all the necessary data had been gathered and we were ready to start summing up the problem, outlining the demands made by conflicting criteria and the various positions presented by opposing interests and making our recommendations for action. I also realized that this tended to happen on days that were relatively quiet in the office, with no crises or meetings. Such spells increased steadily in frequency, and the SLV-3 dream was finally realized in the middle of 1979. We had scheduled the first experimental flight trial of SLV-3 for August 10, 1979. The primary goals of the mission were to realize a fully integrated launch vehicle, to evaluate onboard systems like stage motors, guidance and control systems and electronic subsystems, and to evaluate ground systems, like checkout, tracking, telemetry and real-time data facilities in launch operations built at the Sriharikota Launch Complex. The 23-meter-long, 4-stage SLV rocket weighing 17 tons finally took off elegantly at 0758 hours and immediately started following its programmed trajectory. Stage I performed to perfection. There was a smooth transition from this stage to the second stage. We were spellbound to see our hopes flying in the form of the SLV-3. Suddenly, the spell was broken. The second stage went out of control. The flight was terminated after 317 seconds and the vehicle's remains, including my favorite fourth stage with the payload splashed into the sea, 560 kilometers off Sriharikota. The incident caused us profound disappointment. I felt a strange mix of anger and frustration. Suddenly, I felt my legs become so stiff that they ached. The problem was not with my body, something was happening in my mind. The premature death of my hovercraft Nandi, the abandoning of the RATO, the abortion of the SLV Diamond fourth stage all came alive in a flash, like a long-buried phoenix rising from its ashes. Over the years, I had somehow learned to absorb these aborted endeavors, had come to terms with them and pursued fresh dreams. That day, I relived each of those setbacks in my deep despondency. What do you suppose could be the cause of it? Somebody asked me in the blockhouse. I tried to find an answer, but I was too tired to try and think it out, and gave up the effort as futile. The launch was conducted in the early morning, preceded by a full night's countdown. Moreover, I had hardly had any sleep in the past week. Completely drained mentally as well as physically, I went straight to my room and slumped onto the bed. A gentle touch on my shoulder woke me up. It was late in the afternoon, almost approaching evening. I saw Dr. Brahm Prakash sitting by my bedside. "What about going for lunch?" he asked. I was deeply touched by his affection and concern. I found out later that Dr. Brahmprakash had come to my room twice before that but had gone away on finding me asleep. He had waited all that time for me to get up and have lunch with him. I was sad, but not alone. The company of Dr. Brahmprakash filled me with a new confidence. He made light conversation during the meal, carefully avoiding the SLV3, but gently providing me solace. Dr. Brahmprakash helped me endure this difficult period. In practice, Dr. Brahmprakash employed the front-line damage control principle. Just get the fellow home alive. He'll recover. He drew the entire SLV team close and demonstrated to me that I was not alone in my sorrow at the SLV3's failure. All your comrades are standing by you, he said. This gave me vital emotional support, encouragement, and guidance. A post-flight review conducted on August 11, 1979 was attended by more than 70 scientists. A detailed technical appraisal of the failure was completed. Later, the post-flight analysis committee headed by S.K. Uthathan pinpointed the reasons for the malfunction of the vehicle. It was established that the mishap occurred because of the failure of the second stage control system. No control force was available during the second stage flight, due to which the vehicle became aerodynamically unstable, resulting in altitude and velocity loss. This caused the vehicle to fall into the sea even before the other stages could ignite. Further in-depth analysis of the second stage failure identified the reason as the draining of a good amount of red fuming nitric acid, RFNA, used as the oxidizer for the fuel power at that stage. Consequently, when the control force was demanded, only fuel was injected, resulting in zero force. A solenoid valve in the oxidizer tank, remaining open due to contamination after the first command at T8 minutes, was identified as the reason for the draining of RFNA. The findings were presented to Professor Dhawan at a meeting of top ISRO scientists and were accepted. Everybody was convinced by the technical cause and effect sequence presented, and there was a general feeling of satisfaction about the whole exercise of failure management measures taken. I was still unconvinced though, and felt restless. To me, the level of responsibility is measured by one's ability to confront the decision-making process without any delay or distraction. On the spur of the moment, I stood up and addressed Professor Dhawan. Sir, even though my friends have technically justified the failure, I take the responsibility for judging the RFNA leak detected during the final phase of countdown as insignificant. As a mission director, I should have put the launch on hold and saved the flight if possible. In a similar situation abroad, the mission director would have lost his job. I therefore take responsibility for the SLV-3 failure. For quite some time there was pin-drop silence in the hall. Then Professor Dhawan got up and said, "I am going to put Kalam in orbit," and left the place, signaling that the meeting was over. The pursuit of science is a combination of great elation and great despair. I went over many such episodes in my mind. Johannes Kepler, whose 3 orbital laws form the basis of space research, took nearly 17 years after formulating the 2 laws about planetary motion around the Sun, to enunciate his 3rd law, which gives the relation between the size of the elliptical orbit and the length of time it takes for the planet to go around the Sun. How many failures and frustrations must he have gone through? The idea that man could land on the moon, developed by the Russian mathematician Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, was realized after nearly 4 decades, and by the United States, at that. Professor Chandrasekhar had to wait nearly 50 years before receiving the Nobel Prize for his discovery of the Chandrasekhar limit, a discovery made while he was a graduate student at Cambridge in the 1930s. If his work had been recognized then, it could have led to the discovery of the black hole decades earlier. How many failures must von Braun have gone through before his Saturn launch vehicle put man on the moon? These thoughts helped to give me the ability to withstand apparently irreversible setbacks. Early in November 1979, Dr. Brahmprakash retired. He had always been my sheet anchor in the turbulent waters of VSSC. His belief in team spirit had inspired the management pattern for the SLV project, which later became a blueprint for all scientific projects in the country. Dr. Brahmprakash was a very wise counselor who gave me valuable guidance whenever I deviated from my mission objectives. Dr. Brahmprakash not only reinforced the traits which I had acquired from Professor Sarabhai, but also helped me give them new dimensions. He always cautioned me against haste. Big scientific projects are like mountains, which should be climbed with as little effort as possible and without urgency. The reality of your own nature should determine your speed. If you become restless, speed up. If you become tense and high-strung, slow down. You should climb the mountain in a state of equilibrium. When each task of your project is not just a means to an end but a unique event in itself, then you are doing it well, he would tell me. The echo of Dr. Brahmprakash's advice could be heard in Emerson's poem on Brahma: if the red slayer think he slays, or, if the slain think he is slain, they know not well, the subtle ways I keep, and pass, and turn again. To live only for some unknown future is superficial. It is like climbing a mountain to reach the peak without experiencing its sides. The sides of the mountain sustain life, not the peak. This is where things grow, experience is gained, and technologies are mastered. The importance of the peak lies only in the fact that it defines the sides. So I went on towards the top, but always experiencing the sides. I had a long way to go, but I was in no hurry. I went in little steps, just one step after another, but each step towards the top. At every stage, the SLV3 team was blessed with some extraordinarily courageous people. Along with Sudhakar and Sivaramakrishnan, there was also Sivakaminathan. He was entrusted with bringing the C-band transponder from Trivandrum to Shar for integration with the SLV3. The transponder is a device fitted with the rocket system to give the radar signals which are powerful enough to help it track the vehicle from the take-off site to the final impact point. The SLV-3 launch schedule was dependent on the arrival and integration of this equipment. On landing at the Madras airport, the aircraft which Shivakami was traveling in skidded and overshot the runway. Dense smoke engulfed the aircraft. Everyone jumped out of the aircraft through emergency exits, and desperately fought to save themselves, all except Shivakami, who stayed in the aircraft till he removed the transponder from his baggage. He was among the last few persons, the others being mostly aircraft crew, to emerge from the smoke, and he was hugging the transponder close to his chest. Another incident from those days that I recall clearly relates to Professor Dhawan's visit to the SLV-3 assembly building. Professor Dhawan, Madhavan Nair, and I were discussing some finer aspects of the SLV-3 integration. The vehicle was kept on the launcher in a horizontal position. When we were moving around and examining the readiness of the integrated hardware, I noticed the presence of big water ports for extinguishing fire in case of an accident. For some reason, I felt uncomfortable at the sight of the ports facing the SLV-3 on the launcher. I suggested to Madhavan Nair that we could rotate the ports so that they were apart by a full 180°. This would prevent the freak possibility of water gushing out and damaging the rocket. To our surprise, within minutes of Madhavan Nair getting the ports reversed, powerful water jets gushed out of the ports. The vehicle safety officer had ensured the functioning of the firefighting system without realizing that it could have wrecked the entire rocket. This was a lesson in foresight. Or did we have divine protection? On July 17, 1980, 30 hours before the launch of the second SLV-3, the newspapers were filled with all kinds of predictions. One of the newspapers reported, "The project director is missing and could not be contacted." Many reports preferred to trace the history of the first SLV-3 flight, and recalled how the third stage had failed to ignite because of lack of fuel and the rocket had nosedived into the ocean. Some highlighted SLV-3's possible military implications in terms of acquiring the capability for building IRBMs. Some were a general prognosis of all that ailed our country and related it to the SLV-3. I knew that the next day's launch was going to decide the future of the Indian space program. In fact, to put it simply, the eyes of the whole nation were on us. In the early hours of the next day, July 18, 1980 at 0803 HRS to be precise, India's first satellite launch vehicle, SLV-3 lifted off from Shar. At 600 seconds before takeoff, I saw the computer displaying data about stage 4 giving the required velocity to the Rohini satellite, carried as payload, to enter its orbit. Within the next 2 minutes, Rohini was set into motion in a low Earth orbit. I spoke, in the midst of screeching decibels, the most important words I had ever uttered in my life: mission director calling all stations. Stand by for an important announcement. All stages perform to mission requirements. The fourth stage APJ motor has given the required velocity to put Rohini satellite into orbit. There were happy cries everywhere. When I came out of the blockhouse, I was lifted onto the shoulders of my jubilant colleagues and carried in a procession. The whole nation was excited. India had made its entry into the small group of nations which possessed satellite launch capability. Newspapers carried news of the event in their headlines. Radio and television stations aired special programs. Parliament greeted the achievement with the thumping of desks. It was both the culmination of a national dream, and the beginning of a very important phase in our nation's history. Professor Satish Dhawan, Chairman ISRO, threw his customary guardedness to the winds and announced that it was now well within our ability to explore space. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi cabled her congratulations. But the most important reaction was that of the Indian scientific community. Everybody was proud of this 100% indigenous effort. I experienced mixed feelings. I was happy to achieve the success which had been evading me for the past 2 decades, but I was sad because the people who had inspired me were no longer there to share my joy: my father, my brother-in-law Jalaluddin, and Professor Sarabhai. The credit for the successful SLV-3 flight goes, first, to the giants of the Indian space program, Professor Sarabhai in particular, who had preceded this effort, next to the hundreds of VSSC personnel who had through sheer willpower proved the mettle of our countrymen, and also, not least, to Professor Dhawan and Dr. Brahm Prakash, who had led the project. We had a late dinner that evening. Gradually, the din and clatter of the celebrations calmed down. I retired to my bed with almost no energy left. Through the open window, I could see the moon among the clouds. The sea breeze seemed to reflect the buoyancy of the mood on Sriharikota Island that day. Within a month of the SLV-3 success, I visited the Nehru Science Centre in Bombay for a day, in response to an invitation to share my experiences with the SLV-3. There, I received a telephone call from Professor Dhawan in Delhi, asking me to join him the next morning. We were to meet the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. My hosts at the Nehru Centre were kind enough to arrange my ticket to Delhi, but I had a small problem. It had to do with my clothes. I was dressed casually as is my wont and wearing slippers, not, by any standards of etiquette, suitable attire in which to meet the Prime Minister. When I told Professor Dhawan about this problem, he told me not to worry about my dress. "You are beautifully clothed in your success," he quipped. Professor Dhawan and I arrived at the Parliament House Anixa the next morning. A meeting of the Parliamentary Panel on Science and Technology chaired by the Prime Minister was scheduled. There were about 30 members of the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha in the room, which was lit by a majestic chandelier. Professor M.G.K. Menon and Dr. Nag Chaudhary were also present. Srimati Gandhi spoke to the members about the success of the SLV-3 and lauded our achievement. Professor Dhawan thanked the gathering for the encouragement given by them to space research in the country and expressed the gratitude of the ISRO scientists and engineers. Suddenly, I saw Srimati Gandhi smiling at me as she said, "Kalam, we would like to hear you speak." I was surprised by the request as Professor Dhawan had already addressed the gathering. Hesitantly, I rose and responded, "I am indeed honored to be in this great gathering of nation builders. I only know how to build a rocket system in our country, which would inject a satellite, built in our country, by imparting to it a velocity of 25,000 kilometers per hour." There was thunderous applause. I thanked the members for giving us an opportunity to work. on a project like the SLV-3 and prove the scientific strength of our country. The entire room was irradiated with happiness. Now that project SLV-3 had been successfully completed, VSSC had to reorganize its resources and redefine its goals. I wanted to be relieved of the project activities, and consequently VED Prakash Sandlas from my team was made the project director for the SLV-3 continuation project, which aimed at making operational satellite launch vehicles of a similar class. With a view to upgrade the SLV-3 by means of certain technological innovations, the development of augmented satellite launch vehicles, ASLVs, had been on the cards for some time. The aim was to enhance the SLV-3 payload capability from 40 kg to 150 kg. MSR Dev from my team was appointed Project Director ASLV. Then, to reach the Sun synchronous orbit, 900 km, a PSLV was to be made. The Geosatellite Launch Vehicle, GSLV, was also envisaged, though as a distant dream. I took up the position of Director, Aerospace Dynamics and Design Group, so that I could configure the forthcoming launch vehicles and technology development. The existing VSSC infrastructure was inadequate to handle the size and weight of the future launch vehicle systems, and the implementation of all these projects was going to require highly specialized facilities. New sites were identified for the expanded activities of VSSC at Vadiyo Orkavua and Vala Umla. Dr. Srinivasan drew up a detailed plan of the facilities. Meanwhile, I carried out an analysis of the application of SLV-3 and its variants with Shivathanupalai, and compared the existing launch vehicles of the world for missile applications. We established that the SLV-3 solid rocket systems would meet the national requirements of payload delivery vehicles for short and intermediate ranges, 4,000 km. We contended that the development of one additional solid booster of 1.8 m diameter with 36 tons of propellant along with SLV-3 subsystems would meet the ICBM requirement, above 5,000 km for a 1,000 kg payload. This proposal was, however, never considered. It nevertheless paved the way for the formulation of the re-entry experiment, REX, which, much later on, became Agni. The next SLV-3 flight, SLV-3D1, took off on May 31, 1981. I witnessed this flight from the visitors' gallery. This was the first time I witnessed a launch from outside the control center. The unpalatable truth I had to face was that by becoming the focus of media attention, I had aroused envy among some of my senior colleagues, all of whom had equally contributed to the success of SLV-3. Was I hurt at the coldness of the new environment? Perhaps yes, but I was willing to accept what I couldn't change. I have never lived off the profits of others' minds. My life, in keeping with my nature, has never been that of a ruthless achiever. The SLV-3 was made not by force and manipulation, but through consistent collective effort. Then why the sense of bitterness? Was it peculiar to the VSSC top level or a universal reality? As a scientist, I was trained to reason out reality. In science, reality is that which exists. And because this bitterness was real, I had to reason it out. But can these things be reasoned out? Were my post-SLV experiences leading me into a critical situation? Yes and no. Yes, because the glory of SLV-3 had not gone to everyone who deserved it, but hardly anything could have been done about that. No, because a situation can be considered critical for a person only when realization of the internal necessity becomes impossible. And that certainly was not the case. In fact, the concept of conflict is built upon this basic idea. In retrospect, I can only say that I was fully aware of a great need for actualization and renewal. In January 1981, I was invited by Dr. Bharat Rao of the High Altitude Laboratory, now the Defense Electronics Applications Laboratory, DEAL, Dehradun, to give a lecture on the SLV-3. The renowned nuclear scientist, Professor Rajaramana, whom I had always admired, and who was then the scientific advisor to the defense minister, presided over the gathering. He spoke on India's efforts in generating nuclear energy and the challenge in conducting the first nuclear test for peaceful purposes. As I had been so closely involved with SLV-3, it was natural that I was soon in full spate about it. Later, Professor Rajaramana invited me for a private meeting over tea. The first thing that struck me when I met Professor Ramana was his genuine pleasure at meeting me. There was an eagerness in his talk, an immediate, sympathetic friendliness, accompanied by quick, graceful movements. The evening brought back memories of my first meeting with Professor Sarabhai as if it was yesterday. The world of Professor Sarabhai was internally simple and externally easy. Each of us working with him was driven by a single-minded need to create, and lived under conditions which made the object of that need directly accessible. Sarabhai's world was tailor-made to our dreams. It had neither too much nor too little of anything needed by any one of us. We could divide it by our requirements without a remainder. My world, by now, had no simplicity left in it. It had become an internally complex and externally difficult world. My efforts in rocketry and in achieving the goal of making indigenous rockets were impeded by external obstacles and complicated by internal wavering. I was aware that it required a special effort of the will to sustain my trajectory. The coordination of my present with my past had already been jeopardized. The coordination of my present with my future was uppermost in my mind when I went to have tea with Professor Ramana. He did not take long to come to the point. The Devil missile program had been shelved in spite of tremendous achievements made by Narayanan and his team at DRDL. The entire program of military rockets was reeling under a persistent apathy. The DRDO needed somebody to take command of their missile programs which had been stuck at the drawing board and static test bed stages for quite a while. Professor Ramana asked me if I would like to join DRDL and shoulder the responsibility of shaping their Guided Missile Development Program, GMDP. Professor Ramana's proposal evoked a mixture of emotions in me. When again would I have such an opportunity to consolidate all our knowledge of rocketry and apply it? I felt honored by the esteem in which Professor Ramana held me. He had been the guiding spirit behind the PAKIR nuclear test, and I was thrilled by the impact he had helped create on the outside world about India's technical competence. I knew I would not be able to refuse him. Professor Ramana advised me to talk to Professor Dhawan on this issue so that he could work out the modalities of my transfer from ISRO to DRDL. I met Professor Dhawan on January 14, 1981. He gave me a patient hearing, with his typical penchant for weighing everything carefully to make sure he didn't miss a point. A markedly pleasant expression came to his face. He said, "I am pleased with their appraisal of my man's work." He then smiled. I have never met anyone with a smile quite like Professor Dhawan's, a soft white cloud, you could picture it in any shape you wanted to. I wondered how I should proceed. Should I formally apply for the post so that DRDL could send the appointment order? I inquired of Professor Dhawan. No. Don't pressurize them. Let me talk to the top-level management during my next visit to New Delhi, Professor Dhawan said. I know you have always had one foot in DRDO, now your whole center of gravity seems to have shifted towards them. Perhaps what Professor Dhawan was telling me had an element of truth in it, but my heart had always been at ISRO. Was he really unaware of that? Republic Day, 1981 brought with it a pleasant surprise. On the evening of January 25, Mahadevan, secretary to Professor U.R. Rao, rang up from Delhi to inform me about the Home Ministry announcement about the conferment of the Padma Bhushan Award on me. The next important call was from Professor Dhawan to congratulate me. I felt blissfully elated as it was from my guru. I rejoiced with Professor Dhawan at his receiving the Padma Vibhushan and I congratulated him wholeheartedly. I then rang up Dr. Brahm Prakash and thanked him. Dr. Brahm Prakash chided me for the formality and said, "I feel as if my son has got the award." I was so deeply touched by Dr. Brahm Prakash's affection that I could no longer keep my emotions in check. I filled my room with the music of Bismillah Khan's Shanae. The music took me to another time, another place. I visited Rameswaram and hugged my mother. My father ran his caring fingers through my hair. My mentor, Jalaluddin, announced the news to the crowd gathered on Mosque Street. My sister, Zohara, prepared special sweets for me. Pakshi Lakshmana Sastari put a tilak on my forehead. Father Solomon blessed me holding the Holy Cross. I saw Professor Sarabhai smiling with a sense of achievement. The sapling which he had planted 20 years ago had finally grown into a tree whose fruits were being appreciated by the people of India. My Padma Bhushan evoked mixed reactions at VSSC. While there were some who shared my happiness, there were others who felt I was being unduly singled out for recognition. Some of my close associates turned envious. Why do some people fail to see the great values of life because of sadly twisted thought processes? Happiness, satisfaction, and success in life depend on making the right choices, the winning choices. There are forces in life working for you and against you. One must distinguish the beneficial forces from the malevolent ones and choose correctly between them. An inner voice told me that the time had come for a long felt, but ignored, need for renewal. Let me clean my slate and write new sums. Were the earlier sums done correctly? Evaluating one's own progress in life is not an easy task. Here the student has to set his own questions, seek his own answers and evaluate them to his own satisfaction. Judgment aside, 18 years at ISRO was too long a stay to leave without pain. As for my afflicted friends, the lines by Lewis Carroll seemed very appropriate. You may charge me with murder or want of sense. We are all of us weak at times. But the slightest approach to a false pretense was never among my crimes. A minor tussle over my services occurred at this time, between ISRO, which was a little hesitant to relieve me, and DRDO, which wanted to take me in. Many months went by, and many letters were exchanged between ISRO and DRDO, and meetings were held in the secretariats of the Defense R&D establishment and the Department of Space to precipitate a mutually convenient course of action. Meanwhile, Professor Ramana retired from the office of the Scientific Advisor to Defense Minister. Dr. V.S. Arunachalam, till then Director of the Defense Metallurgical Research Laboratory, DMRL, in Hyderabad, succeeded Professor Ramana. Dr. Arunachalam was known for his confidence, and he cared little for the intricacies and nuances of the scientific bureaucracy. Meanwhile, I understand that the Defense Minister at that time, R. Venkatraman, discussed the matter of my taking over the missile laboratory with Professor Dhawan. Professor Dhawan also seemed to be waiting for a decisive step at the highest level in the Defense Ministry. Overcoming the niggling doubts that had caused delays over the past year, the decision to appoint me Director, DRDL, was finally taken in February, 1982. Professor Dhawan used to visit my room in the ISRO headquarters and spend many hours in evolving space launch vehicle projects. It was a great privilege to work with such a great scientist. Before I left ISRO, Professor Dhawan asked me to give a talk on the space program profile in India by the year 2000. Almost the entire ISRO management and staff attended my talk, which was by way of a farewell meeting. I had met Dr. V.S. Arunachalam in 1976, when I visited DMRL in connection with the aluminium alloy investment casting for the SLV inertial guidance platform. Taking it as a personal challenge, Dr. Arunachalam had the investment casting, the first of its kind in the country, made in the incredibly short time of 2 months. His youthful energy and enthusiasm never failed to amaze me. This young metallurgist had within a short span of time lifted the science of metal making to the technology of metal forming and then to the art of alloy development. With a tall and elegant figure, Dr. Arunachalam was like an electrically charged dynamo himself. I found him an unusually friendly person with a forceful manner, as well as an excellent working partner. I visited DRDL in April 1982 to acquaint myself with my potential worksite. The director of DRDL then, S.L. Bansal, took me around and introduced me to the senior scientists in the laboratory. DRDL was working on 5 staff projects and 16 competence build-up projects. They were also involved in several technology-oriented activities with a view to gain lead time for the development of indigenous missile systems in future. I was particularly impressed by their efforts on the twin 30-ton liquid propellant rocket engine. Meanwhile, Anna University, Madras, conferred the honorary degree of Doctor of Science on me. It had been nearly 20 years since I had acquired my degree in aeronautical engineering. I was happy that Anna University had recognized my efforts in the field of rocketry, but what pleased me most was the recognition of the value of our work in academic circles. To my delight, the honorary doctorate degree was awarded at a convocation presided over by Professor Rajaramana. I joined DRDL on June 1, 1982. Very soon, I realized that this laboratory was still haunted by the winding up of the Devil missile project. Many excellent professionals had not yet recovered from the disappointment. People outside the scientific world may find it difficult to comprehend how a scientist feels when the umbilical cord to his work is suddenly snapped, for reasons totally alien to his understanding and interests. The general mood and work tempo at DRDL reminded me of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Day after day, day after day, we stuck, nor breath, nor motion, as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. I found almost all my senior colleagues living with the pain of dashed hopes. There was a widespread feeling that the scientists of this laboratory had been cheated by the senior officials in the Ministry of Defense. It was clear to me that the burial of the devil was essential for the rise of hope and vision. When about a month later, Admiral O.S. Dawson, then the Chief of Naval Staff, visited DRDL, I used it as an opportunity to make a point with my team. The Tactical Core Vehicle, TCV, project had been hanging fire for quite some time. It was conceived as a single-core vehicle with certain common subsystems to meet the requirements of the services for a quick reaction surface-to-air missile, an anti-radiation air-to-surface missile which could be launched from helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft. I emphasized the sea-skimming role of the core vehicle to Admiral Dawson. I focused not on its technical intricacies, but on its battlefield capabilities, and I highlighted the production plans. The message was loud and clear to my new associates: do not make anything which you cannot sell later, and do not spend your life on making one thing only. Missile development is a multi-dimensional business. If you remain in any one dimension for a long time, you will get stuck. My initial few months at DRDL were largely interactive. I had read at St. Joseph's that an electron may appear as a particle or wave depending on how you look at it. If you ask a particle question, it will give you a particle answer. If you ask a wave question, it will give you a wave answer. I not only described and explained our goals, but also made them an interplay between our work and ourselves. I still recall quoting Ronald Fisher at one of the meetings: "The sweetness we taste in a piece of sugar is neither a property of the sugar nor a property of ourselves. We are producing the experience of sweetness in the process of interacting with the sugar." Very good work on a surface-to-surface missile with a vertical rise-turn straight-line climb ballistic path had been done by that time. I was astonished to see the determination of the DRDL workforce, who, in spite of the premature winding up of their earlier projects, were eager to go ahead. I arranged reviews for its various subsystems, to arrive at precise specifications. To the horror of many old-timers in DRDO, I started inviting people from the Indian Institute of Science, Indian Institutes of Technology, Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and many other educational institutions where related experts could be found. I felt that the stuffy work centers of DRDL needed a breath of fresh air. Once we opened the windows wide, the light of scientific talent began to pour in. Once more, Coleridge's Ancient Mariner came to mind. Swiftly flew the ship riding gently the oncoming tide. Sometime in the beginning of 1983, Professor Dhawan visited DRDL. I reminded him of his own advice to me almost a decade ago: you have to dream before your dreams can come true. Some people stride towards whatever it is that they want in life, others shuffle their feet and never get started because they do not know what they want and do not know how to find it either. ISRO was lucky to have had Professor Sarabhai and Professor Dhawan at the helm, leaders who elucidated their goals, made their missions larger than their lives, and could then inspire their entire workforce. DRDL had not been so lucky. This excellent laboratory played a truncated role that did not reflect its existing or potential capabilities or even fulfill the expectations in South Block. I told Professor Dhawan about the highly professional, but slightly bewildered team I had. Professor Dhawan responded with his characteristic broad smile, which could be interpreted in any way one chose. In order to accelerate the pace of R&D activities at DRDL, it was imperative that decisions on vital scientific, technical and technological problems be taken quickly. Throughout my career I had zealously pursued openness in scientific matters. I had seen from very close quarters the decay and disintegration that go with management through closed-door consultations and secret manipulations. I always despised and resisted such efforts. So the first major decision which we took was to create a forum of senior scientists where important matters could be discussed and debated as a collective endeavor. Thus, a high-level body called the Missile Technology Committee was formed within DRDL. The concept of management by participation was evoked and earnest efforts were made to involve middle-level scientists and engineers in the management activities of the laboratory. Days of debate and weeks of thinking finally culminated in the long-term guided missile development program. I had read somewhere, "Know where you are going. The great thing in the world is not knowing so much where we stand, as in what direction we are moving." What if we did not have the technological might of the Western countries? We knew we had to attain that might, and this determination was our driving force. To draw up a clear and well-defined missile development program for the production of indigenous missiles, a committee was constituted under my chairmanship. The members were Z.P. Marshall, then the chief of Bharat Dynamics Limited, Hyderabad, N.R. Iyer, A.K. Kapoor and K.S. Venkatraman. We drafted a paper for the perusal of the Cabinet Committee for Political Affairs, CCPA. The paper was given its final shape after consulting the representatives of the three defense services. We estimated an expenditure of about 390 rupees crores, spread over a period of 12 years. Development programs often get stuck by the time they reach the production stage, mainly because of lack of funding. We wanted to get funds to develop and produce two missiles: a low-level quick reaction tactical core vehicle and a medium-range surface-to-surface weapons system. We planned to make a surface-to-air medium-range weapons system with multi-target handling capability during the second phase. DRDL had been known for its pioneering work in the field of anti-tank missiles. We proposed to develop a third-generation anti-tank guided missile having fire and forget capabilities. All my colleagues were pleased with the proposal. They saw an opportunity to pursue afresh activities initiated long ago. But I was not entirely satisfied. I longed to revive my buried dream of a re-entry experiment launch vehicle, REX. I persuaded my colleagues to take up a technology development project to generate data for use in the design of heat shields. These shields were required for building up capability to make long-range missiles in the future. I made a presentation in the South Block. The presentation was presided over by the Defense Minister of the time, R. Venkatraman, and attended by the three service chiefs, General Krishna Rao, Air Chief Marshal Dilbak Singh and Admiral Dawson. The Cabinet Secretary, Krishna Rao Sahib, Defence Secretary, S.M. Ghosh, and Secretary, Expenditure, R. Gunpati were present. Everyone seemed to have all sorts of doubts about our capabilities, about the feasibility and availability of required technological infrastructure, about the viability, the schedule, and cost. Dr. Arunachalam stood by me like a rock throughout the entire question-answer session. Members were skeptical and apprehensive of drift which they felt was common among scientists. Although some questioned our ambitious proposal, everyone, even the doubting Thomases, were very excited about the idea of India having her own missile systems. In the end, we were asked by Defence Minister Venkatraman to meet him in the evening, about 3 hours later. We spent the intervening time working on permutations and combinations. If they sanctioned only 100 rupees crores, how would we allocate it? Suppose they gave us 200 rupees crores, then what would we do? When we met the defense minister in the evening, I had a hunch. We were going to get some funds at any rate. But when he suggested that we launch an integrated guided missile development program, instead of making missiles in phases, we could not believe our ears. We were quite dumbfounded by the defense minister's suggestion. After a long pause, Dr. Arunachalam replied, "We beg for time to rethink and return, sir." "You come back tomorrow morning please," the defense minister replied. It was reminiscent of Professor Sarabhai's zeal and vision. That night, Dr. Arunachalam and I labored together on reworking our plan. We worked out some very important extensions and improvements in our proposal, taking all the variables, such as design, fabrication, system integration, qualification, experimental flights, evaluation, updating, user trials, producibility, quality, reliability, and financial viability into account. We then integrated them into a single function of total accountability, in order to meet the needs of the country's armed forces with an indigenous endeavor. We worked out the concepts of design, development, production concurrency and proposed the participation of user and inspection agencies right from the drawing board stage. We also suggested a methodology to achieve state-of-the-art systems after all the years of developmental activities. We wanted to deliver contemporary missiles to our services and not some outdated inventory of weapons. It was a very exciting challenge that had been thrown to us. By the time we finished our work, it was already morning. Suddenly, at the breakfast table, I remembered that I was to attend my niece Zamila's wedding at Rameswaram that evening. I thought it was already too late to do anything. Even if I could catch the Madras flight later in the day, how would I reach Rameswaram from there? There was no air link between Madras and Madurai from where I could board the evening train to Rameswaram. A pang of guilt dampened my spirits. Was it fair, I asked myself, to forget my family commitments and obligations? Zamila was more like a daughter to me. The thought of missing her wedding because of professional preoccupations at Delhi was very distressing. I finished breakfast and left for the meeting. When we met Defence Minister Venkatraman and showed him our revised proposal, he was visibly pleased. The proposal of the missile development project had been turned overnight into the blueprint of an integrated program with far-reaching consequences. It would have wide-ranging technological spin-offs, and was exactly what the Defence Minister had had in mind the previous evening. Notwithstanding the great respect I had for the Defence Minister, I was not really sure if he would clear our entire proposal. But he did. I was absolutely delighted. The Defence Minister stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Turning to me he said, "Since I brought you here, I was expecting you to come up with something like this. I am happy to see your work." In a split second, the mystery surrounding the clearance of my appointment as Director DRDL in 1982 was cleared. So it was Defence Minister Venkatraman who had brought me in. Bowing in thanks, I turned towards the door when I heard Dr. Arunachalam telling the minister about Zamila's wedding being scheduled for that evening at Rameswaram. It amazed me that Dr. Arunachalam should bring up this matter before the minister. Why would a person of his stature, sitting in the all-powerful South Block, be concerned about a wedding which was to take place on a far-flung island in a small house on Mosque Street? I have always had a high regard for Dr. Arunachalam. He has, together with a command over language as he displayed on this occasion, an uncanny presence of mind. I was overwhelmed when the defense minister located an Air Force helicopter doing sorties between Madras and Madurai later in the day to take me to Madurai as soon as I disembarked at Madras from the regular Indian Airlines flight, which was leaving Delhi in an hour's time. Dr. Arunachalam told me, "You have earned this for your hard work of the last 6 months." Flying towards Madras, I scribbled on the back of my boarding pass, "Who never climbed the weary league? Can such a foot explore the purple territories on Rameswaram's shore?" The Air Force helicopter landed close to the Indian Airlines aircraft as soon as it arrived from Delhi. Within the next few minutes I was on my way to Madurai. The Air Force commandant there was kind enough to take me to the railway station, where the train to Rameswaram was just about to roll out of the platform. I was in Rameswaram well in time for Zamila's wedding. I blessed my brother's daughter with a father's love. The defense minister put up our proposal before the cabinet and saw it through. His recommendations on our proposal were accepted and an unprecedented amount of 388 rupees crores was sanctioned for this purpose. Thus was born India's prestigious Integrated Guided Missile Development Program, later abbreviated to IGMID. When I presented the government sanction letter before the Missile Technology Committee at DRDL, they were enthused with fire and action. The proposed projects were christened in accordance with the spirit of India's self-reliance. Thus the surface-to-surface weapons system became Prithvi, the earth, and the tactical core vehicle was called Trishul, the trident of Lord Shiva. The surface-to-air area defense system was named as Akash, sky, and the anti-tank missile Project Nag, Cobra. I gave the name Agni, fire, to my long-cherished dream of Rex. Dr. Arunachalam came to DRDL and formally launched the IGMID on July 27, 1983. It was a great event in which every single employee of DRDL participated. Everybody who was somebody in Indian aerospace research was invited. A large number of scientists from other laboratories and organizations, professors from academic institutions, representatives of the armed forces, production centers, and inspection authorities, who were our business partners now, were present on this occasion. A closed-circuit TV network had to be pressed into operation to ensure proper communication between the participants, for we had no single place to accommodate all the invitees. This was the second most significant day in my career, next only to July 18, 1980, when the SLV-3 had launched Rohini into the Earth's orbit. The launch of the IGMID was like a bright flash on the Indian scientific firmament. Missile technology had been considered the domain of a few selected nations in the world. People were curious to see how, with what India had at that point of time, we were going to achieve all that was promised. The magnitude of the IGMID was really unprecedented in the country, and the schedules projected were quite quixotic by the norms and standards prevailing in the Indian R&D establishments. I was fully aware that obtaining sanction for the program could at best be seen as only 10% of the work done. To get it going would be quite a different matter altogether. The more you have, the more there is to maintain. Now that we had been given all the necessary money and freedom to proceed, I had to take my team forward and fulfill the promises I had made. What would be needed to realize this missile program, from the design to the deployment stages? Excellent manpower was available, money had been sanctioned, and some infrastructure also existed. What was lacking then? What else does a project need to succeed apart from these three vital inputs? From my SLV-3 experience, I thought I knew the answer. The crux was going to be outmastery over missile technology. I expected nothing from abroad. Technology is a group activity, and we would need leaders who could not only put their heart and soul into the missile program, but also carry along with them hundreds of other engineers and scientists. We knew we had to be prepared to encounter numerous contradictions and procedural absurdities that were prevalent in the participating laboratories. We would have to counteract the existing attitudes of our public sector units, which believed that their performance would never be tested. The whole system, its people, procedures, infrastructure would have to learn to extend itself. We decided to achieve something that was way beyond our collective national capability, and I, for one, had no illusions about the fact that unless our teams worked on the basis of proportion or probability, nothing would be achieved. The most remarkable thing about DRDL was its large pool of highly talented people, many of whom were, unfortunately, full of egotism and rebelliousness. Unfortunately, they had not even accumulated enough experience to make them confident about their own judgment. On the whole, they would discuss matters very enthusiastically, but would finally accept what a select few said. They would unquestioningly believe in outside specialists. A particularly interesting person I met in DRDL was A.V. Rangarao. He was very articulate and had an impressive personality. His usual garb consisted of a red necktie with a checked coat and loose trousers. He would wear this in the hot climate of Hyderabad, where even a long-sleeved shirt and shoes are considered an avoidable inconvenience. With his thick white beard and a pipe clamped between his teeth, there was a certain aura around this extremely gifted, but rather egocentric individual. I consulted Rangarao on revamping the existing management system to achieve an optimum utilization of human resources. Rangarao had a series of meetings with the scientists sharing our vision of developing indigenous missile technology and explaining the different aspects of the Agni. After prolonged discussions, we decided to reorganize the laboratory into a technology-oriented structure. We needed to accommodate a matrix type of structure for the execution of various activities needed for the projects. In less than 4 months, 400 scientists began to work on the missile program. During this period, the most important task before me was the selection of the project directors to lead individual missile projects. We had a very large pool of talent. In fact, it was a market of plenty. The question was whom to pick: a go-getter, a planner, a maverick, a dictator, or a team man. I had to get the right type of leader who could clearly visualize the goal, and channelize the energies of his team members who would be working at different work centers in pursuit of their own individual goals. It was a difficult game, some rules of which I had learned while working on ISRO's high-priority projects for 2 decades. The wrong choice would jeopardize the entire future of the program. I had a detailed discussion with a large number of prospective scientists and engineers. I wanted these 5 project directors to train another 25 project directors and team leaders of tomorrow. Many of my senior colleagues naming them would be unfair, because it could be only my imagination tried to befriend me during this period. I respected their concern for a lonely man, but avoided any close contacts. Through loyalty to a friend, one can be easily led into doing something that is not in the best interests of the organization. Perhaps the main motive behind my isolation was my desire to escape from the demands of relationships, which I consider very difficult in comparison to making rockets. All I desired was to be true to my way of life, to uphold the science of rocketry in my country, and to retire with a clean conscience. I took quite some time and did a lot of hard thinking to decide who should lead the 5 projects. I examined the working styles of many scientists before making my decision. I think some of my observations may interest you. A basic aspect of a person's working style is how he plans and organizes tasks. At one extreme is the cautious planner, who carefully spells out each step before making any move. With a sharp eye for what can possibly go wrong, he tries to cover all contingencies. At the other end is the fast mover, who weaves and dodges without a plan. Inspired by an idea, the fast mover is always ready for action. Another aspect of a person's working style is control the energy and attention devoted to ensuring that things happen in a certain way. At one extreme is the tight controller, a strict administrator with frequent checkpoints. Rules and policies are to be followed with religious fervor. At the opposite end are those who move with freedom and flexibility. They have little patience for bureaucracy. They delegate easily and give their subordinates wide latitude for movement. I wanted leaders who tread the middle path, those who could control without stifling dissent or being rigid. I wanted men who had the capability to grow with possibilities, with the patience to explore all possible alternatives, with the wisdom to apply old principles to new situations, people with the skill to negotiate their way forward. I wanted them to be accommodating, to be willing to share their power with others and work in teams, delegating good jobs, assimilating fresh opinions, respecting intelligent people, and listening to wise counsel. They would have to be able to sort out things amicably and take responsibility for slip-ups. Above all, they should be able to take failure in their stride and share in both success and failure. My search for someone to lead the Prithvi project ended with Colvj Sundaram, who belonged to the EAM Corps of the Indian Army, with a postgraduate degree in aeronautical engineering and expertise in mechanical vibrations. Sundaram was head of the structures group at DRDL. I found in him a readiness to experiment with new ways of resolving conflicting points of view. He was an experimenter and innovator in teamwork. He had an extraordinary capability for evaluating alternative ways of operating. He would suggest moving forward into new terrains that could lead to a solution which had not been perceived earlier. Though a particular goal might be clear to a project leader, and he may be capable of giving adequate directions for accomplishing it, there can be resistance from subordinates if the goal makes no sense to them. Therein lies the importance of a leader who provides effective work directions. I thought the project director of Prithvi would be the first to make decisions with production agencies and the armed forces, and Sundaram would be the ideal choice to see that sound decisions were taken. For Trishul, I was looking for a man who not only had a sound knowledge of electronics and missile warfare, but who could also communicate the complexities to his team in order to promote understanding and to earn his team's support. I found in CMDESR Mohan, who sailed into defense R&D from the Indian Navy, a talent for detail and an almost magical power of persuasion. For Agni, my dream project, I needed somebody who would tolerate my occasional meddling in the running of this project. In R.N. Agarwal I found the right person. He was an alumnus of MIT with a brilliant academic record and had been managing the aeronautical test facilities at DRDL with keen professional acumen. Due to technological complexities, Akash and Nag were then considered missiles of the future. Their activities were expected to peak about half a decade later. Therefore, I selected the relatively young Prahlada and N.R. Iyer for Akash and Nag. Two other young men, V.K. Sarasvat and A.K. Kapoor, were made deputies to Sundaram and Mohan respectively. In those days, there was no forum in DRDL where issues of general importance could be openly discussed and decisions debated. Scientists, it must be remembered, are basically emotional people. Once they stumble, it is difficult for them to pull themselves together. Setbacks and disappointments have always been and always will be an inherent part of any career, even one in science. However, I did not want any of my scientists to face disappointments alone. I also wanted to ensure that none of them set their goals when they were at a low ebb. To avoid such eventualities, a science council was created, a sort of panchayat where the community would sit together and take common decisions. Every 3 months, all scientists, juniors and seniors, veterans and freshers would sit together and let off steam. The very first meeting of the council was eventful. After a spell of half-hearted inquiries and expressions of doubt, one senior scientist, M.N. Rao, shot a straight question: on what basis did you select these 5 Pandavas? He meant the project directors. I was, in fact, expecting this question. I wanted to tell him that I found all these 5 Pandavas married to the Draupadi of positive thinking. Instead, I told Rao to wait and see. I had chosen them to take charge of a long-term program where new storms would arise every day. Every tomorrow, I told Rao, will give opportunities to these enthusiastic people, the Agarwals, Prahladas, Iers, and Saraswats, to gain a fresh perspective on their goals and a strong hold on their commitments. What makes a productive leader? In my opinion, a productive leader must be very competent in staffing. He should continually introduce new blood into the organization. He must be adept at dealing with problems and new concepts. The problems encountered by an R&D organization typically involve trade-offs among a wide variety of known and unknown parameters. Skill in handling these complex entities is important in achieving high productivity. The leader must be capable of instilling enthusiasm in his team. He should give appropriate credit where it is due, praise publicly, but criticize privately. One of the most difficult questions came from a young scientist. How are you going to stop these projects from going the devil way? I explained to him the philosophy behind Agni. It begins with design and ends in deployment. The participation of the production centers and user agencies right from the design stage had been ensured, and there was no question of going back till the missile systems had been successfully deployed in the battlefield. While the process of forming teams and organizing work was going on, I found that the space available at DRDL was grossly inadequate to meet the enhanced requirements of Agni. Some of the facilities would have to be located at a nearby site. The missile integration and checkout facility built during the Devil phase consisted only of a 120 square meter shed thickly populated with pigeons. Where was the space and the facility to integrate the 5 missiles which would arrive here shortly? The environmental test facility and the avionics laboratory were equally cramped and ill-equipped. I visited the nearby Imarakancha area. It used to be the test range for anti-tank missiles developed by DRDL decades ago. The terrain was barren, there were hardly any trees, and dotted with large boulders typical of the Deccan Plateau. I felt as if there was some tremendous energy trapped in these stones. I decided to locate the integration and checkout facilities needed for the missile projects here. For the next 3 years, this became my mission. We drew up a proposal to establish a model high-technology research center with very advanced technical facilities like an inertial instrumentation laboratory, full-scale environmental and electronic warfare, ME/EMC, test facilities, a composites production center, high-enthalpy facility, and a state-of-the-art missile integration and checkout center. By any standards, this was a gigantic task. An altogether different brand of expertise, grit, and determination were required to realize this project. Goals and objectives had already been decided upon. Now they had to be shared with a large number of people from various agencies, through the problem-solving and communication processes that the leader of the team must build and maintain. Who would be the most suitable person to do so? I saw almost all the required leadership qualities in MV Suryakanta Rao. Then, as a large number of agencies would participate in the creation of Research Center Imara, RCI, someone had to protect hierarchical sensitivities. I selected Krishna Mohan, who was in his mid-30s, to complement Suryakanta Rao, who was in his late 50s at that time. Krishna Mohan would encourage involvement rather than relying on obedience and monitoring people at their workplaces. According to the established procedure, we approached the Military Engineering Services, MES, for the RCI construction work. They said it would take 5 years to complete the task. The matter was discussed in depth at the highest level in the Ministry of Defense, and a landmark decision to entrust the responsibility of building defense structures to an outside construction company was taken. We liaised with the Survey of India and the National Remote Sensing Agency for the inspection of the contour maps and for obtaining aerial photographs of the Imarakancha to prepare a layout for the approach roads and the location of the facilities. The Central Groundwater Board identified 20 locations amid the rocks to tap water. Infrastructure to provide 40 MVA power and 5 million liters of water per day was planned. It was also at this time that Colsk Salwin, a mechanical engineer with boundless energy, joined us. In the final phase of construction, Salwin discovered an ancient place of worship among the boulders. It seemed to me that this place was blessed. Now that we had started working on the design of the missile systems and development had already commenced for their integration and checkout, the next logical step was to look for a suitable site for the missile flight trials. With Shar also in Andhra Pradesh, the search for a suitable site spread towards the eastern coastline and finally ended at Balasore in Orissa. A site along the northeastern coast was identified for a national test range. Unfortunately, the entire project ran into rough weather because of the political issues raised around the evacuation of people living in that area. We decided therefore to create an interim infrastructure adjacent to the Proof Experimental Establishment, PXE, at Chandipur in Balasore district of Orissa. A funding of 30 rupees crores had been given to construct the range, called the Interim Test Range. ITR. Dr. H.S. Ramarao and his team did an excellent job of working out innovative and cost-effective specifications for electro-optical tracking instruments, a tracking telescope system and an instrumentation tracking radar. LT Gen Rs Deswal and Maj Gen KN Singh took charge of creating the launch pad and range infrastructure. There was a beautiful bird sanctuary in Chandipur. I asked the engineers to design the test range without disturbing it. Creating the RCI was perhaps the most satisfying experience of my life. Developing the Center of Excellence of Missile Technology was akin to the joy of a potter shaping artifacts of lasting beauty from the mundane clay. Defense Minister R. Venkatraman visited DRDL in September 1983 to appraise himself of the activities of IGMIDP. He advised us to list all the resources we needed to achieve our goals, overlooking nothing, and then include in the list our own positive imagination and faith. What you imagine is what will transpire. What you believe is what you will achieve, he said. Both Dr. Arunachalam and I saw in the horizon endless possibilities stretching out before IGMIDP, and our enthusiasm proved infectious. We were excited and encouraged to see the best professionals in the country gravitating towards IGMIDP. Who would not want to associate with a winner? The word had evidently got around that the IGMIDP was a born winner.